Hello, this is Paul DeWitt, attorney and member of the Nashville Bar Association Historical Committee. And we are continuing our project of interviewing Nashville attorneys and judges as part of the Oral History Project. Today we're very honored to interview Dale Quillen, longtime member of the Nashville Bar, still practicing law here in Nashville-Davidson County. And I want to introduce him to you at this time.
Okay, as Mr. DeWitt just told you, my name is Dale Quillen. Also, my birth date is June 6, 1925. In other words, I'll be 88 years old in about 2 weeks.
Dale, I want to start off and ask you where you were born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Scott County, Virginia. That's a county that's adjacent to the Tennessee state line, right across the line from Kingsport, Tennessee.
And did you move to Tennessee at a young age?
My parents moved to Tennessee when I was 3 years old, 1928. And I've been a resident of Tennessee since that time.
I believe you grew up in the small town of Baileyton,
Baileyton, Tennessee. That's a little town of about 225 population. It is an incorporated town.
Is that right?
And has been since 1915, but it's right on it's on the north side of Greene County, near the Hawkins County line.
All right, and Greene County is in the far northeast part of Tennessee.
Yes, it's adjacent to North Carolina.
And the county seat, I believe,
county seat is Greenville.
Okay. What kind of work did your dad do?
My father was a school teacher.
Is that right?
He had, he was a high school principal, I think, for 27 of his 30 years. And he had retired at about the time I was born.
Oh, is that right?
And I had the benefit, although I didn't treat it at the time as a benefit, but I did have the benefit of, he was my teacher. In fact, he had taught me to read before I ever attended school, and also the first dollar I ever earned in my life was saying my multiplication tables 1 through 12 forward and backward. He paid me $1.
How old were you when you learned your multiplication tables?
Probably about 5.
Is that right?
Yes.
Most school children wouldn't learn those till when they're 10 or 11.
Well, my father had become disabled. He'd had an injury and was, of course, as I say, he was a retired teacher, but he wasn't working, so he practiced. He just continued to practice teaching using me as the subject.
And your mother, was she a
My mother had taught school also.
Is that right?
So, although he's the one that did most of the teaching.
I know Quillen is a prominent name up in Upper East Tennessee.
Well, a fellow named Jimmy Quillen made it prominent by getting himself elected to Congress and staying there for about 34 years. He was a distant relative.
Distant relative of yours.
Although he was a Republican and I'm a Democrat, we never allowed that to worry us too much.
And you grew up in Greene County and attended, I guess, the schools?
Local schools. I left school and joined the Marines when I was 17.
And that would have been about 1943?
1942.
42.
I left on the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1942.
Tell us a little bit about your service in the Marines. I know you eventually were in Iwo Jima, but we'll get to that in a minute.
My first destination, as it is with about all Marines, was Parris Island, South Carolina. It's either Parris Island or San Diego, California, but if you're from the eastern part of the United States, if you enlist in the Marine Corps, you probably go to Parris Island.
Boot camp there?
Boot camp, and I've told the story that my first instructor was a private first class, but he had 2 hash marks. He'd been in the Marine Corps more than 8 years, but yet he was still only a private first class. And his name was Wilkins. He instructed me that I would refer to him as Instructor Wilkins, and that he would refer to me as stupid. And that's about the way that game went for a while.
You had no choice but to accept that.
Had no choice.
Moniker.
That's right. That was, of course, I wasn't alone. It was the entire platoon.
And once you made it through boot camp, where were you?
I went from there to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, where, well, actually, I was at Parris Island for 15 weeks. Now, I did have a virus during that time that slowed me down a little. It left me a week behind. I remember being hospitalized. My roommate in the hospital was a movie actor named Sterling Hayden.
Oh, yes.
And of course, after I was discharged, I had to go back to a different platoon. But they slowed the process down somewhat, and I've thought in retrospect that we were mobilizing so fast they didn't have any place to send us. Uh-huh. And when I got to Camp Lejeune, they put me in what was known as a casualty company. Nobody sick, just that was a holding place to, again, as I say, I think it was a matter of being such rapid mobilization that they just didn't have a place situated. But when I did get an assignment, I was put in a mess hall for 30 days to wait on tables for a unit that was just then being organized to train dogs for war. We had a war dog training camp and
at Camp Lejeune.
At Camp Lejeune, and that was in the early stages of it. There had been one platoon had already been trained and had gone out into the Pacific.
Were they German Shepherds? What kind of dogs were thought to be?
They were probably predominantly Doberman Pinschers, and that was because of the president of the Doberman Pinscher Association was quite active and found out about these war dogs and volunteered to become the recruiter.
Uh-huh.
And of course, they were predominantly a Doberman Pinscher.
What role were the Dobermans in the battle?
They were trained, the most effective use for them was just for scouting and patrolling, because a dog has such superior olfactory senses that you can, with a dog, if the handler is alert, the dog will alert to any kind of any stranger that might be present or close by, or it might just be an animal. But at least you know something is there. And as a result of those dogs, we never experienced an ambush.
So you were being trained to deploy or handle the dogs,
yes.
and they would be trained to respond to your
that
call?
was my first assignment. I was assigned a dog, but the dog that I had been assigned to was a pet and was never going to be anything but a pet and was not considered suitable for that service. So as a result, I no longer had a dog. I looked on the bulletin board and I saw that I and another Marine were listed as supernumeraries.
What is that?
Well, that's what I wondered, what a supernumerary. I had to run from the dictionary and I found out it was actually just an extra number. But anyway, the two of us became just attached to the platoon, and the platoon commander, platoon leader, he would use us for whatever flunky job he thought we needed us for.
How long did it take to train you and the dogs?
Well,
platoon?
it would usually the period was about 3 to 4 months, and dogs. I say they were used very, very effectively for that type of work. Now, also they were used at night for reconnaissance, and they were very helpful in that respect because troops will rest better if they know that there's somebody on duty with a dog, and that was very helpful.
I'm picturing in my mind these dogs are being put on ships to go out into the Pacific with the Marines to the part of the campaign of island hopping.
Well, I can tell you a very, very interesting story. It's a little bit off color, but
it's all right.
It's all right. We had, you're right, we were put on ships to be transported. For instance, my group, we left from San Diego, California, on our way to Guadalcanal.
When did you depart from San Diego?
February 23rd, 1944.
Okay.
I remember the date well.
I'm sure it was memorable.
And we were on that ship, traveling, of course, during the day. The dogs were kept in kennels, but they would be taken out of the kennels various times during the day, and they would relieve themselves right on the back deck of the ship. Well, in one instance, there was quite a mess back there on the back end of the ship, and there was a ship's officer dressed in his white uniform, white shoes. He came down and was grumbling about the plight of the deck, and he pointed his white toe, he pointed toward a dog stool there and said, "Feces, feces." We had an old boy there from Texas. His name was Gerald Blaylock. Gerald was probably the least formally educated person in the unit, although he was quite intelligent. But when that officer said, "Feces, feces," Blaylock said, "Lieutenant, that ain't feces, that's dog shit." Which got a good laugh.
Surely the lieutenant understood.
He turned and walked away, didn't he? He didn't need any more education.
Well, so where did you end up with what was the first
we did stop at Guadalcanal.
By that time, was the Battle of Guadalcanal?
The Battle of Guadalcanal was over.
We had been there, 6 months, and if I recall the history correctly.
Guadalcanal, the battle for Guadalcanal, the Marines landed there on August the 7th, 1942. And this was about April 1944 when we got there. I mean, the Japanese were long gone, any of them that had remained there.
What kind of mission did y'all have there? Just
training.
Training the dogs for future.
It was a jungle atmosphere, very hot and humid.
Oh my gosh.
The biggest enemy the dog had was parasites and then skin infections. But
did you have a corps of veterinarians?
Well, no. My lieutenant was a graduate of the Auburn Veterinary School. He had not as yet. He'd also been in ROTC training there and had been the head of his class. And as head of the class, the Marine Corps would grant him a commission without going through the regular procedure at Quantico, Virginia.
Oh.
So he walked away from Auburn right into the Marine Corps as a second lieutenant, and then got assigned to that war dog platoon.
How many were in the platoon? How many men?
There would be about 60.
So you were at Guadalcanal for what?
I stayed there, just 2 or 3 months. We left Guadalcanal, actually left in June, intending to invade Guam in June of 1944. But the 2nd and 4th Marine Division and the 27th Army Division got into more of a fight at Saipan than they had anticipated. And then in the meantime, the remnants of the Japanese Navy came out of the Philippines and engaged in a battle with American ships in what is known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea. It was primarily an air battle. I mean, those people who participated in the battle would sometimes never see an enemy ship. It was all fighting other airplanes. And
our air forces were by that time pretty much superior to the
yes,
Japanese.
our air forces won that battle. Yeah. And of course then, although we were held up, actually we were taken into the Marshall Islands just to hold up until the Battle of the Philippine Sea was finished. And then they loaded us up again and we went to Guam.
And
now Saipan had been invaded, but the fighting had been quite intense. And
Saipan is another island.
It is another island of the Mariana Group.
All right.
It's about 100 miles from Saipan to Guam.
Okay, and the Japanese were trying to mount stiff resistance on
They
Saipan.
They did mount stiff resistance, and we lost a lot of people there. But then.
So did you go to Guam then quickly to Saipan?
We went to Guam about 1 month after invaded Saipan. I think they invaded Saipan on about the 21st of June, and we landed on Guam on 21st of July, 1944. Battle lasted about around until 15th of August. They declared it secure, although there were an estimated 8,000 Japanese remaining on the island.
Just holed up in foxholes?
Yeah, they would. In fact, one fellow stayed in the jungle there for 28 years.
I've heard those tales. I guess there's truth to...
The story was that he wanted to avoid both Japanese and Americans. He'd been involved in what would have been considered a murder case of killing 5 American sailors. He didn't want the Americans to catch him for that. Yet in the meantime, he was a deserter from the Japanese army. So
he was doomed whichever way he went if he came out.
Although, as it turned out, after 28 years, they took him to Japan, made a hero out of him, paid him all of his back pay.
Oh my gosh. So what did you have your dog there doing reconnaissance?
I didn't have the dog at that time. I was still used, well, that veterinarian that I mentioned to you, he became ill. Lost a lot of weight, actually was diagnosed as having amoebic dysentery. And he was returned to the States, and for the lack of anyone else, it became my duty to look after the welfare of the dogs, health-wise, and to see that they were properly fed and so forth.
So you kind of stepped up into a medical role.
Well,
had you grown up with dogs?
Well, yes, I had, but I mean, as far
just
as
as pets.
the dogs that we had when I was a child, they never saw a veterinarian, you know.
Well, you obviously had some skill.
Well, I had observed, the primary problem would be parasites, worms, and skin diseases, and I had observed Dr. Putney, that was the veterinarian that we had, I'd see what he did, and I just copied him. I did run into some interesting chores in that capacity. One was Admiral Nimitz, Chester Nimitz, who was Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet. He had been by to see our dogs. In fact, anytime some dignitary would land on Guam, if it was the duty of Admiral Nimitz to take him on a tour, he'd come by for a dog show.
Oh.
So I got a call one day to come to the commanding officer's tent, at which time I was told that the commander, and I don't remember his name, but he was Admiral Nimitz's aide, Commander so-and-so wanted to speak with me. Of course, there I was, a private first class. I might have been a corporal, I don't know, but anyway.
All of about 18 years old.
Yeah, I was 19. At that stage in life, you're always intimidated talking to anybody of any rank above you, much less full commander.
So.
But anyway, his statement to me was that he wanted me to come down to Nimitz Heights and strip the Admiral's schnauzer.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't know what stripping was, and I really didn't know what a schnauzer was. Well, I made, as soon as I got finished that conversation, I explained my plight, and somebody knew that a schnauzer was a breed of dog, but nobody knew what that stripping was. And I had met a young Marine who was out there in one of the regiments, just as an infantryman, but he had attended veterinary school. So I went looking for him. I found him, and he told me that he had done a little stripping in veterinary school and said, "I'll be glad to help you any way I can." So I recruited him to go with me to Nimitz Heights to strip Admiral Nimitz's schnauzer. And we got down there, waited about 15 minutes, and here came Admiral Nimitz. He had a little old thing in his hand, looked like a pocket knife, and what it was a kind of a pocket knife, only it had teeth in the blade. And he explained that some banker in San Francisco had sent him that stripping knife, and he wanted to see how it worked. So he had this, it was a large schnauzer. One of the larger ones looked sort of like an Airedale.
Uh-huh.
And my buddy took the knife and started working on him. Admiral Nimitz stayed around, I guess, for 15, 20 minutes or so, and he decided he wanted to take that dog for a swim that afternoon. So he called for his aide, who was that commander I was telling you about, and a Marine orderly, and they came standing at attention. He let them know he wanted to see how he could work a swim into his schedule that afternoon so he could take his schnauzer for a swim. And that conversation went on about 15 minutes, and I was just standing aside. I mean, I had this other fellow doing all the work. I was just listening to what was being said, and it occurred to me, here's a man running the biggest Navy that's ever been assembled, and it's taken him 15 minutes to figure out how to take a dog for a swim. I'm not too sure that this Navy's in too good shape. Of course, I didn't say that.
No, you're thinking, shouldn't he be planning the invasion of Japan, or at least or Iwo Jima, or what?
Well, that's right. It was that was after the Battle of Iwo Jima.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I know it was.
Talk about you were at. I know you were at Iwo Jima in '45.
I was at Iwo Jima. Actually, the initial landing took place on February the 19th, but I was in the 3rd Marine Division, a reserve unit. Initially, they probably wouldn't even have used the 3rd Division, but after the 3rd day, 4th day, they took 2 regiments of the 3rd Marine Division in. I was in one of those regiments. And we got in there. I went in there on the 23rd of February, and the battle lasted till the 26th of March.
Just
Now,
brutal.
Yeah.
Every day was most of the fighting right out there.
Yeah, it just went on. See, there was only 8 square miles of the island.
Right there.
And there was,
What kind of terrain is Iwo Jima?
well, it was very rough. Because you had Mount Suribachi, that's where the flag was raised, which I think it was about 555 feet, just an old volcano. But then the other, it was about a little over 4 miles long. The other 4 miles was, the Japanese had 750 gun emplacements on it.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And there were 16 miles of tunnels under those underground. And then, of course, the Japanese had not only those gun emplacements, they would have apertures, rounds coming out of the earth just big enough to get a machine gun barrel out of. And those were hard to, I mean, you couldn't get it with a grenade. The only thing you could get it with would be a flamethrower.
All right.
And that didn't admit much flame.
But that was the only way you could get them out of those.
They were gotten out of there by.
And you had to have one person, I guess, throwing the flamethrower and 2 or 3 other people.
Well, it'd usually be at least 4 men covering him, covering that man with the flamethrower.
And meanwhile, you're just being exposed to a barrage of gunfire.
I know. First day, there was a fellow named Herschel Williams, who was awarded a Medal of Honor for his effort. The first day, they were there just not knowing what to do. I mean, had never experienced any sort of defenses they were confronted with. And the commanding officer asked Williams if he thought he could get to him with his flamethrower. He said he didn't know, but he would try. And the commanding officer said, well, you just pick you out 4 men to cover you. You make the choice. Well, he knew enough about the men in the unit. He picked 4 of the best ones he could, great riflemen. That's one thing about Marines, and that's you're all trained as riflemen. And he picked 4. 2 of them got killed, but he managed to take out 8 pillboxes the first day.
The first day,
Yeah.
And was awarded the Medal of Honor.
He was awarded the Medal of Honor for those. Of course, he had to get those flamethrowers. The one that you carried on your back, they weighed about 70 pounds.
Oh my gosh.
When they were full of napalm, that was the liquid that they burned. And 25 or 30 yards, they had to get that close to the
They
target.
could get, the preferred distance was 25 yards away
like,
from the pillbox.
It'd be that distance. Of course, those 4 riflemen would either with their rifles or throwing grenades into the hole if they could. That was the way they tried to pin the Japanese away from the entry. But once those flamethrower got in there, it sucked out all the oxygen. I mean,
Difficult to breathe.
As well as burning them,
Yeah.
Left them without any oxygen.
Oh, brutal fighting.
It went on.
So how many pillboxes or emplacements?
They had 750 gun
And they had to be
emplacements.
taken out one by one?
Yes, that was
Wow.
the way it was
And
done.
it took, I guess.
Took 36 days.
Oh my.
I'll say they originally anticipated that the battle would last 4 or 5 days. I mean, everything in war is a mistake, an error. I mean,
Right, but
nothing happens the way it's supposed to.
were you were exposed pretty much every day to this type of thing?
Every day.
And were you ever wounded? Or?
Well, no. Now, I say we would. You'd fight 3 days and nights, and then you'd have a day off. Your day off meant that you weren't aggressively trying to take the enemy, but your day off, you wouldn't be fighting, but you would also be used as probably carrying a stretcher bearer or carrying ammunition.
In other words, your day off was hardly a day.
Your
of just
day
sitting
off
around the
was not
campfire
sitting
you
around
were
resting.
working.
It was some, dangerous work that, I mean, especially in the nighttime, if you're carrying, say you've got a wounded man on a stretcher. He may be in great pain, usually not so much in pain because the first thing that a medic would do, we called them corpsmen in the Marine Corps and Navy, if a man was wounded, the first thing they'd do is hit him with morphine. They'd probably be feeling pretty good, but still as you carried them along, you'd probably have to put them down every once in a while. And you'd put them down pretty fast. It was never too, you didn't feel too good about throwing a man to the ground. Who was
What kind of hospital would he be flown to?
They would, excuse me, this
troop.
thing is falling away.
Get that reattached.
Aid station, be carried back to an aid station where there'd be a doctor there to administer as best he could, and then they would be moved on to a hospital ship where they could clean them up and whatnot.
So it took 36 days to finally bring about the surrender.
It started on the 19th of February, and it was on the 26th of March. At, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they announced that the Army's taking over. Well, I looked around to see if I could see any soldiers. I didn't see any. But somebody said, "To hell with it, let's go." We're relieved. So it took off.
Was that the day the flag was raised?
Oh, no, the flag was actually raised on the 4th day.
Oh, okay. So we were declaring victory
Well,
in a sense before
they
the job had...
They didn't declare the victory. It was, of course, it was on the high ground, but actually they had very little resistance going up that mountain.
Is that right?
In fact, 2 Marines had gone up on the morning, just gone up by themselves and didn't run into anything. They were a little bit stupidly foolish, I think. They were foolish to undertake it, but nevertheless they did it and got away with it. And then there was a full platoon that went up there, and they ran into very little resistance on the mountain.
On the mountain. And that was just the 4th day into the
Yeah,
thing.
that was the 4th day. But once that flag went up, it became all hell broke
Oh,
loose.
yeah. It was... The next 32 days were just brutal fighting. So it was March 26th before finally Iwo Jima was cleared.
And that's when we declared it. We turned it over to the Army. And I've heard that the Army lost, well, I've heard various numbers, but they still had hundreds of those Japanese that were still in those 16 miles of tunnels. And that was to contend with, I suppose. In fact, I think they had some of those Japanese, I think, stayed there about 4 years.
But the Marines moved off Iwo Jima?
Oh, yes, we were withdrawn.
Where did you go from there?
Well, my unit went back to Guam. That's where we had been. We went back to Guam to prepare for the invasion of the mainland of Japan, which would have happened about November the 5th, 1945.
I believe it called Operation Olympia.
I think so.
Wow. Well,
I remember I left Iwo Jima the 12th day of April, 1945. It was the day Franklin Roosevelt died.
Wow.
And of course, it was only about a 4 or 5 day trip to Guam, and we stayed there and were training until about August the 5th, when dropped the atomic bomb on.
So you were in Guam when the news
was-
came that the
yes.
atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima,
Yeah.
and then a couple days after that, I guess Nagasaki.
Well, it was dropped on the 6th of August, I believe, Nagasaki on the 9th. But from the way it was being described, I know the first description I heard of it, that it was so powerful that in an experiment at Los Alamos, New Mexico, it had vaporized a steel tower. And I thought, if we've got a weapon that's powerful enough to vaporize a steel tower, this war is going to have to be over.
Yeah. Were there any rumors before that we had?
No.
There was no, you had absolutely no hope or rumors?
I didn't even know what an atom was. I was with an older man who had attended college 3 or 4 years. He said, "My God, they've actually split the atom." I said, "What do you mean split the atom?"
you didn't know what an atom was?
He knew a little about physics and whatnot, but that's the way it was described. And
But you when you heard that it was so powerful it could vaporize a steel tower, that made you think, well,
I know the next day I was supposed to be training a group of replacements with some dogs, and I was so convinced the war was over, I told them to take it easy. I was going to go look for a stalk of bananas.
on Guam, this
On
was.
Guam, and I did. I found a stalk of bananas. They weren't very big bananas, a little bigger than my fingers. And I had that stalk of bananas over my shoulder, walking back to where the men were that I'd left behind, and a darn grenade fragment hit the tree right beside my head. I thought, now, I've been out here. It's been my policy not to look for any grenade or for any souvenirs. I wouldn't pick one up. And here I am foolishly looking for a stalk of bananas and about to get myself killed.
So there were Japanese still burrowed in?
Well, no, that grenade fragment was actually from a friendly grenade. There was a group of Marines training with grenades, and I'd gotten a little too close to where they were. I didn't know they were there. They didn't know where I was.
Oh, my gosh.
But, yeah, there were Japanese still there, a lot of them.
So once the 2 atomic bombs were dropped, were you officially for a few weeks still training?
It was, I think, the 15th of August. The word came in that the Japanese were suing for peace. And the first thing that alerted me to it, it was a little after lights out. Lights would go out at 10 o'clock, although people might not necessarily be in their bunks. And it was probably about 10:30. I was stationed adjacent to the division band. Well, it was about 10:30, 10:45. I overheard noise, and even some lights were coming on. So I looked out to see what that noise was going on, and the division band was forming right in the middle of the street with a big bass drummer. He had on a pair of undershorts. That's the only clothes he had on. And they were assembling, getting ready to go to division headquarters. And they were playing California, Here I Come. So I got behind them just to see what happened. They showed up at the division headquarters. The commanding general wasn't there. But the chief of staff came out and said that all they knew was that the word had come through Switzerland that the Japanese were suing. He said, "We don't know how true it is. It may just be rumor. We hope it's true." And advised all the band and others to go on back to their quarters.
But the mood must have been tremendously
yes.
brightened and optimistic.
It was, and in fact, the next day, that's when I decided I didn't want to bother with any training. I went looking for my stalk of bananas.
Indeed, the Japanese did sue for peace,
They had, yes.
and the war came to an end there, I guess. When
Yeah, you see, what had been one of the big holdups was that unconditional surrender. That was a rule that it was Winston Churchill. Stalin may have been a part of it. Roosevelt, I mean, I think it originated with Churchill, that the only way we'll accept any surrender will be unconditional surrender. Well, those people who were leaders, knowing they were probably going to be hanged, that unconditional surrender didn't appeal to them. And that may have caused the war to go on just a little longer than it might have otherwise.
Yeah, because it wasn't, I think, till early September that the peace was.
No, it was the 15th of August.
15th of August.
But now they got around to signing the peace treaty on the second day of September. That was
MacArthur and
aboard the battleship Missouri,
is that right?
which sailed into Tokyo Bay. And MacArthur, in his dignified mannerism, went in to accept the surrender.
You said you met Admiral Nimitz. Did you meet any of the other prominent?
Oh yes, those dogs. They were always putting on a show. There were other. Admiral Raymond Spruance, who was
at Midway.
yes,
A hero at Midway.
Spruance was there, and Bull Halsey. Then there were actually the admiral who ran amphibious operations was a fellow named Richmond Kelly Turner. Now nobody much ever heard of him, but he was in charge really of all the Marine divisions. He was the man on the scene, so to speak, in those amphibious operations.
So you were in the 3rd Marine Division.
3rd Marine Division.
It originally was just a support unit, but then in the press of Iwo Jima,
No,
you
it, of course, 3rd Division
a reserve unit.
had participated in the Battle of Bougainville, had taken the island of Bougainville.
Oh, so.
And then we went to Guam. It was a Marine brigade that later became the 6th Marine Division and the 27th Army Division that took Guam initially. And that Saipan, it was the 2nd, 4th Marine Division and the 77th Army Division. And one of the big hullabaloos of the Battle of Saipan, of course, the overall officer in charge was a Marine by the name of Holland Smith. They called him Howlin' Mad. That was his nickname.
Howlin' Mad
Howlin'
Smith.
Mad Smith. And during the course of the Battle of Saipan, he fired the Army general and replaced him with somebody else, and that caused a big hullabaloo.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
He was thought of as overstepping his bounds.
Well, what had happened, the three divisions landed abreast, and there was the 2nd Division on one side, 4th Marine Division on another, and 77th Army Division in the middle. Well, and it turned out that those 2 Marine divisions advanced much more rapidly than the Army Division, and the lines looked like a big U. Well, Howlin' Mad got upset with the Army general. His name was Smith, too, considered to be a first-class officer, really. But because of that U shape in the lines, Howlin' Mad relieved him. And that didn't happen again, I don't.
Well, it would show the competitiveness of the Marines, and
Well, it was just a different tactic. I mean, the Marines were programmed to get there as fast as they could, I think one of the advantages that Marines have is that there's a tremendous emphasis on firing of a rifle. Like a Marine, if he shoots at an enemy 400 yards, he's probably going to hit him.
What kind of rifle did you fire?
It was an M1.
M1.
Garand. The Marines that took Guadalcanal used an old bolt-action single-shot rifle, an old Springfield.
Dale, we could talk about your war experiences for longer, but let's move on to after the war ended. I believe you eventually came back to your home state of Tennessee and Greenville.
Well, I had dropped out of school, and I knew that I hadn't been in the Marine Corps 3 days, and I realized that was a bad mistake, and pledged to myself to correct it.
You head up to your enlistment in 42, gotten through.
Well, I was just there for the duration. And we were rotated out depending on how much combat you'd been in, things of that nature. But I was one of the early ones to be discharged. And although I got back to the States on October 23rd, 1945, and was landed at California and stayed there a couple of weeks. Took 2 weeks to even get a uniform. We were there at Camp Pendleton, but you couldn't go ashore without a uniform, so we were stuck to the base until we could get a uniform. Finally, then those of us that lived in the eastern part of the United States was forwarded on to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, to be discharged from there. And it was 12th of December before I finally got a discharge.
And you came back to Greenville?
Back to Greenville, and I found myself enrolled in school on the 3rd of January. I wasn't waiting.
And you mean high school? Or
yeah, I went.
Oh, you still had...
Well, what happened, Paul, there were over 1 million, I heard, that was published in Time magazine at the time, over 1 million youngsters who had dropped out of high school to get in various branches of the service. And the larger cities established schools to accommodate these people. And Detroit, Michigan was one of the places that had a school. And I had a sister living in Detroit. So I headed there. I know that it was publicized. There was another school in Philadelphia, New York, Chicago. But anyway, Detroit is where I went up, and you could enroll and go through high school as fast as you could absorb it.
So did you fairly quickly complete
I couldn't remember anything I'd ever learned, so I just started all over again.
But you were going to school with other veterans?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, from all over the East.
Yeah,
right?
it was a night school.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and there were, I don't know, it was affiliated with a school that well known in that area named Cass Tech. But that was the administrator of the school was Cass Tech, and there were many of us there.
So you were in Detroit for what?
I stayed up there for 8 months.
8 months, and got your diploma, I guess.
Yeah.
And then
well, I came back and they handed me one. But I had taken a test that would have put me up about a junior in college, they said. I don't know. I mean, it was, well, I wasn't working. All I was doing was reading my books and going to class. So you could move along pretty rapidly that way.
Were you intending to come back and attend college?
Yes, I did. I came back and enrolled at Tusculum College. That's over in Greenville.
And Tusculum may not be that well known to people here in Nashville. But it's
Tusculum is actually the oldest institution of higher learning west of the Allegheny Mountains.
Is that right?
It was organized in 1794.
2 years before Tennessee became a state.
Became a state, and it was affiliated with the Presbyterian Church. Still is.
Is that right? And it even became a college before the University of Tennessee.
Oh yes, it was known as Greenville College. My great-grandfather had attended what was then Greenville College in 1838.
Is that right?
And one of his classmates was a fellow named Sam Milligan. The Milligan family at Greenville, still pretty well known. Sam Milligan became a Chief Justice, I think, of Tennessee Supreme Court. But Andrew Johnson would walk the 4 miles from Greenville out to Tusculum just to debate with the boys. He couldn't afford to go to school, but he would go out and just meet with them. And
he was so poor. I believe he's the last president that did not attend college. I think I read.
He didn't attend any school.
He didn't go to any school at all.
He didn't attend any school other than those trips out there to Tusculum. I believe it was his wife who had taught him to read and write. He came into Greenville from North Carolina, completely illiterate. Set up his tailor shop. He knew how to make clothes, but she taught him to read and write. Then he got involved in local politics. I think he was elected an alderman of the town of Greenville, and then he was later mayor of the town, and moved on up through, he was governor of Tennessee.
He was the military governor, if I'm not mistaken, that the Union put in place.
They had made him a military governor. He was a member of the Congress, I think.
Is that right?
One time or another. And if I'm not mistaken, he got himself elected to the Senate after he had been president.
Is that right?
I'm not 100% sure of that, but I think I've picked up on that.
Interesting. Well, anyway, so you graduated from Tusculum.
I didn't graduate.
Oh, you did not?
No. I had an offer of a job here. And
what was that?
That was... what had happened at that time, Tennessee had only 8 counties of the 95 where whiskey was legally sold. Those other counties, I guess 97 of them, any whiskey that was sold in those counties was done by bootleggers. And the bootleggers would get their whiskey from Illinois or Maryland, and Tennessee was losing the revenue. James Clarence Evans, who was appointed by Gordon Browning as Commissioner of Finance and Taxation, he saw this tremendous leakage of revenue, and he worked out a deal with the Federal Alcohol Tax Unit, whereby the Federal Alcohol Tax Unit would assist the state in collecting its revenue, and the state would assist the federal agents, personnel-wise, furnishing them some men to help in the enforcement of moonshining laws and whatnot. So that worked out, and
you were hired.
I was hired
as a state revenue agent.
State revenue agent, but I was assigned to work with the federal agents.
And this was
1949.
At that time, I believe Gordon Browning was the governor.
Gordon Browning was the governor. Clarence Evans was Commissioner of Finance and Taxation.
Clarence Evans would later become a prominent attorney here in Nashville. But okay, talk a little bit about the kind of work you were doing there.
Well, my first job was just raiding moonshine stills. I know At that time, like in East Tennessee, it was the manufacture of whiskey was concentrated a whole lot in the Cosby area of Cobb County. Now, Cosby is right on the North Carolina line.
Cosby, C-O-S-B-Y.
C-O-S-B-Y is right. It's located, it was 18 miles from Gatlinburg, but at that time there was no passable road between Gatlinburg and Cosby. I mean, it was an isolated community, really one way in and one way out.
Was it like in a valley down between mountains?
Well, it was in you might say it was just a big, I'm trying to get the word, ravine.
Ravine.
It was right back against the mountains. You had North Carolina on one side of it. You had the Smoky Mountain National Park on the other side. Now, they did not make whiskey in the park. They had a federal judge who had warned them to stay out of the park. So they obeyed that.
Got as close to the park as possible without being in the park.
They could get 20 feet from it, but not in it.
So you were assigned to raise the stills?
Yeah. Actually, it's unbelievable, but I participated in the dynamiting of 36 moonshine stills in one day.
36. So dynamite was the method used to get rid of them?
Yeah.
Wow. And 36 in one day?
36
all in the Cosby area?
All in the Cosby area.
You must not have been considered much of a friend by the local folks.
Well, they didn't treat it personally. They wouldn't. They knew that was. Actually, the moonshiners would tell you, if it weren't for you fellas, we couldn't make a living. We created the shortage.
Drove the price up.
Yeah. At that time, excuse me, moonshine whiskey sold for about $3 a gallon. And there were, Knoxville, Tennessee was still practicing prohibition. Asheville, North Carolina, the same way. So Cosby was situated there right between two of these communities with such a large population, but no legal whiskey.
I think a lot of people now may not realize, but just because the constitutional amendment came in 1933 abolishing prohibition didn't mean that there weren't still a lot of
No, it was still a matter of local option.
Right. And many, like you said, I think 87 of Tennessee's 95 counties were dry even.
That's right, except one county, excuse me, County, Tennessee, which is over northeast of Knoxville, had actually voted wet, but under the law, a community had to have a population of 1,000 before it could have a legal whiskey store. So Union County didn't have
any town rising to that amount of population.
That's right. They didn't have any town of that size. And that it remained that way up until about 1970.
Is that right?
It was that time that the law was changed to where municipalities could vote on a wet or dry issue independent of the county in which they were situated.
Back to your own work. So you were an agent.
Yeah, I worked
with the state, but you were under federal.
I worked with them, and in that capacity, I pretty much had their protection.
You were working for the Commissioner Evans.
Well, and yeah, I mean, I worked with an old fellow by the name of Martin Micken, who had been transferred to Tennessee to get him away from New Jersey. He had been involved in a gunfight in New Jersey and had killed a man. And the man that he had killed was an associate of Dutch Schultz.
the bootlegger, the notorious
notorious gangster.
gangster in the 20s and 30s.
And I talked to him a little about it. He never said much, but anyway, he was transferred to Tennessee to get him away from
Retaliation.
From that New Jersey environment. And
But
but he was quite a okay. Although he was 50 years old when he retired, that man could outrun he could outrun me, and I was about 24. I'd be chasing somebody, and first thing I'd know, he would pass me. So much stamina.
Was it necessary to actually physically run down?
That was the way. That was it.
On the stills.
You'd raid a still. There'd usually be two men working there. And of course, if they could outrun you, they'd won the game.
They'd disappear into the hills or whatever.
But if they got outrun, as soon as you put a hand on them, that was it. They didn't fight you.
Didn't resist arrest.
They didn't resist it. That happened a time or two, but they were personalities that pretty much asked for it.
Was each still sort of independently operated, or was there sort of a grand?
No, they would. They'd put them. Well, they had to be located close to water, and in those mountain valleys or hollows, call them, there'd usually be a spring, or it'd be running water, and they could run. I know that day I dynamited those 36 stills. I started at a community known as Bluffton, and I guess it would have been a distance of probably 8 miles as the crow goes. But,
wow.
Course,
these stills were spread out over an 8-mile.
Yeah. There'd be one in about every hall. And that was.
And each and every one sort of was independent from each other.
Yeah,
so there wasn't like a network controlled by a big.
Well, some one individual might have owned more than one of them, but probably.
So it would have been difficult for one to tell the next one, hey, the revenuers are coming.
Well, they would know
from
the time you got there because they kept sentries on duty around the clock. They knew, they would see, I say that, there was only the one main road into Cosby. Well, of course, that was no big problem to keep somebody watching that road. Then there were other mountain roads that were pretty difficult to negotiate, but they'd also put somebody on lookout for those places. And once a strange car was seen, they would discharge a stick of dynamite, notifying the whole countryside that a strange car was in the community. Not necessarily, it didn't have to be a revenue, it just had to be a stranger.
Just any odd-looking vehicle.
Yeah.
Were you dressed in just a casual attire? Or?
Regular street clothes.
How long did you do that kind of work, Dale?
I did that, well, let's see, I started in, believe it or not, I started 64 years ago. Is today the 23rd?
I believe tomorrow's the 23rd.
Tomorrow's 20, well, I started that job 64 years ago tomorrow.
Is that right?
But my first assignment, though, was to come here to Nashville and attend a Treasury Department school. I stayed at that school for about 3 weeks and then went back to Greenville and joined up with the local agents and started searching out those moonshine stills.
And you worked for them for?
I stayed there until November of, that was 49. I stayed there until November 1950. And I came over here with, this title of Assistant Director of the Division, although, as I say, I was just a kind of a glorified clerk.
You worked in an office in
an
Nashville.
office right up here in the War Memorial Building.
Is that right? As assistant, your glorified title is Assistant Director of the Division.
Yeah.
How long did you work there?
I stayed there until 1952. I know there was a change of personnel, and some of the new personnel I didn't figure I wanted to be associated with. And I, in effect, reassigned myself to the local office of the Federal Alcohol Tax Unit. Started the night law school and stayed there for 4 years.
I believe you had an interesting time in the '51. There was a National Governors Conference up in Gatlinburg.
Yes, it was.
All the governors from all the 48
That was in October 1951. Governor Gordon Browning hosted the National Governors Conference. And at that time, it was deemed necessary to make some refreshments available not only to the governors. The big consumers were members of the press.
Oh, they were in
attendance. Although we had 48 governors in attendance, we had about 300 members of the press. Some of them, as mentioned, were quite well known. There was Jim Haggerty there, who was later President Eisenhower's press secretary. He was there at the time as a press secretary for Governor Tom Dewey of New York. And there were others, I don't remember the name, but prominent pressmen. But those people, for the most part, they enjoyed their refreshment. And
Governor Browning wanted to make sure.
Well, Browning didn't personally do it. He had an administrative assistant by the name of Robert Everett. Robert Everett was a huge man who he was born in politics. I think his mother held an elective office in Obion County. He had been an administrative assistant to a member of Congress, and that member of Congress, that I recall, died. And Everett, then Gordon Browning recruited him to be his administrative assistant. And when the job came to be sure that these governors and pressmen were refreshed, Robert Everett summoned me to come up to the Capitol, and he told me that I could go to the prison and borrow a truck from the warden. Suggested I get somebody to drive it, didn't have to do it myself. But go to Lippman Brothers Wholesale Liquor House here in Nashville. And I know they had 55 cases of Jack Daniels available. Every word he'd learned. I remember one time he came to me, I owed him $19.
Oh my gosh.
Well, you know, you can't just learn one word, you learn two or three in the process of learning one.
Well, you had taught him well, because I remember, I think he was salutatorian or valedictorian at MBA.
No, I don't know. He was pretty high up there, but
in the class, yeah. Of 72. I was in the class of 73.
Yeah.
What was it, just in the day-to-day practice of law in the courts of Nashville back then? I guess you would back then the practice of law much more frequently in the courthouse.
Oh, yes.
Every day you're up there trying cases.
Well, as I say, much of what I had in the early days was in the federal courts.
In the federal courts.
In fact, there were people who got the idea that that's the only place I practiced. I didn't like that reputation too much, but as I say, I had some success, especially with these. Although I represented people charged with other crimes, but especially in those whiskey cases, that was just part of my program.
That was sort of your bread and butter client.
I mean, we had at that time, I'd have probably 100 clients a year, either here or in East Tennessee. But I say, it served me well, the fact that the word got out that I'd have my job somewhere. And that was, appealing. Well, all those judges, they realized that a lot of those people were otherwise almost unemployable. I mean, they weren't educated, and they had no particular trade skills. And if they, I've had some old revenuers tell me the saddest times of their work would be to raid a moonshine still about Christmas time, knowing that the fellow that they'd raided had 4 or 5 children that weren't going to have any Christmas just because of what they'd done. And
but you were able to find them employment sooner or later, and by the time they're court date.
Well, it's like the boys galvanized, they learned those people. If I'd recommended them, they knew somebody that was probably going to be a hard worker. And I mean, it was not work that just anybody would choose.
Right. It was, I'm sure, hard-working folks, but they had grown up working hard.
Oh, they didn't know any. Most of it would be farm work or something.
Well, Dale, talk a little bit about, I guess, your practice branched out more in the 70s and 80s, and you were in state court more often.
Well, actually, it came about with the controlled substances. I practiced law for 15 years before I ever had a dope case, so to speak.
Those didn't really start coming to, I guess, the early 70s.
It started pretty much with the advent of the Vietnam War. A good many soldiers got, dope was readily available. I had a fella tell me that he could buy a pound of heroin in Vietnam for $35. And but a lot of them got to using it, and then they brought the habit home with them. But I believe it was about 1969. No. Well, one of the first drug cases I had was a fellow, a client. He was a student out here at Tennessee State University from rural West Tennessee. His father had struggled to even get him to Nashville on a bus. But some couple of Sharpies got him to go down here to, I think it's People's Farm, we went to a wholesale drug house here in Nashville and bought a case of cough syrup that was laced with codeine, and told him it was for People's Pharmacy. Well, this fella, not knowing the difference, he went in and ordered it, but he did it right in the presence of some law enforcement person, and that got him arrested. Well, they arrested him and the 2 people that had sent him, and I remember trying the case before Judge John Draper. I represented the client, the poor devil that had been sent in there, and the others were represented by, one of them by Avon Williams and the other one by Bob Lillard. Of course,
both of whom were very prominent African-American attorneys in Nashville.
But my client got convicted because you just, bark at the moon as to talk about entrapment in a drug case. But Judge Draper, I think, gave my boy a 10-day sentence.
10 days.
10 days, and these others were punished more severely. But that was, what was the name of that cough syrup? Something that had initials. Anyway, I don't remember just exactly what it was. And then it wasn't long after that until I got some heroin cases. There used to be a fellow in North Nashville who got raided every Friday night.
A heroin dealer, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those were the early days of a vice squad was organized about that time. But those vice squad officers were not very well trained. And they could not get a search warrant that would pass muster. I mean, I just quashed warrant after warrant until they, I think they finally decided to get some help. I remember an assistant DA whom you knew, probably John Rogers.
Oh, yes.
John got involved and
trained him how to draft search
corrected
warrants.
those warrants, yes. I think much so as anybody, he was the one who made the correction. See, John was a retired FBI agent.
Right. I think Tom Shriver hired him
And
after he retired.
Tom hired him.
And his son, John Jr.
And I don't know I haven't seen John Jr. for years. I haven't.
He retired from practicing law, at least 5 or 6 years
Is that
ago.
right?
Yeah, I haven't seen him much either.
And of course, his father and I had had some good fights
I bet you had.
when he was an FBI agent, and then we continued scrapping around in Judge Draper's courtroom.
He would be prosecuting
He'd be
a heroin case, and maybe a search warrant issue.
Yeah.
What were some of your other bigger cases?
Well, I don't care to use names, but one was a well-known musician who got charged with a little bit of cocaine that he never did get. It was sent to him by a fellow in New York. The fellow who sent it got arrested there and got a light sentence. Once the cocaine got to Nashville, I think the reason my client didn't get it is because his drummer got it and sniffed it.
His drummer intercepted
His drummer intercepted and
snorted up all the product.
Yeah.
But they went ahead and charged him?
They charged him, but it got dismissed without any trouble much.
But you've represented some murderers and other
yes, you've had
people.
One of the worst murder cases that I ever got involved in was at Newport, Tennessee. Over there, at about 2 o'clock one Christmas morning, they got into a gun battle, and when the smoke cleared, they had 4 dead and 3 wounded.
Newport being the county seat of Cobb County in your old area.
And I represented a fellow who was indicted for 3 murders.
Oh my gosh.
And it was, the facts were terrible. And my client got 60 years. And then he got another lawyer who, believe it or not, got him a new trial on the ground that I had been too aggressive. And by being so aggressive, I had made the judge angry.
Oh my gosh.
Which that was probably true, but he was a judge that you couldn't get along with. I mean, I wasn't going to let him run over my client.
Sure.
I probably made so many objections in a tone of voice that may not have been tactful. But anyway, the fellow was granted a new trial, and they retried him. another lawyer who's now a judge represented him on the second trial, found guilty again, got 50 years.
Yes.
And after that, of course, he was serving his time, but he's long been out of prison. I was told that he had some knowledge of cocaine getting into the prison system, and he used that information to get years cut off of his time. He's been.
He provided some information about how.
That's what I was told. I know he's been. He didn't serve over 6 or 7 years altogether.
Well, Dale, we've got to wrap up here in a couple minutes. You, apart from your practice of law, have been very active in Veterans Affairs and I believe the Third Marine Division Association is something you've been very active in.
Yeah, I was a member of the Third Marine Division, and I attended a reunion, and the judge advocate was a rather prominent person from the state of Alabama who, well, actually, Senator Hal Heflin had been one of his lieutenants. Heflin was in the Third Marine Division, and this fellow's name was Conrad Fowler. Fowler was so busy lobbying in Washington. Of course, you can be a good lobbyist if you have a former lieutenant who is a leading member of the United States Senate.
As was Senator Heflin.
Yeah, and Fowler was so busy lobbying, he said, Dale, I don't have time to be Judge Advocate of this association. And he said, if you please let yourself be elected, that way I won't have to worry with it. Well, there wasn't a whole lot to it, except they had a midwinter meeting that interfered with, they no longer had the midwinter, or didn't have it much longer, but anyway, that was interfering with his lobbying business. I mean, he was not only, he was a very charming individual, and he not only was close to Senator Heflin, he was very close to every member of the Alabama delegation, and no telling where else. But anyway, they elected me Judge Advocate of the Third Marine Division Association. I remained their Judge Advocate for about 25 years.
Is that right?
Finally, I told them it's time to get somebody else.
I believe the Third Marine Division has had some very illustrious Medal of Honor winners. And
they had, I don't know how many Medal of Honor winners, a good many. Let's see. But the Third Marine Division has stayed in combat longer than any other unit in the United States. They stayed in Vietnam for 4 years. One of the Medal of Honor winners lived here in Nashville about a year, a fellow named Harvey Barnum.
Is that right?
He's still around. And
do you get together with him? Do you have reunions?
Yeah, we have reunions. We have an annual reunion. And I don't know. I know that we had one Medal of Honor winner who, during the Battle of Iwo Jima, he was operating a Browning automatic rifle, and they claimed they counted 60 some odd enemy in front of him. He was on a hill there by himself. I mean, the others couldn't get to him.
He had made his way up there by himself.
He had gotten up on this rise, and others just couldn't get there with him. And he was firing a Browning automatic rifle, and they claimed they counted over 60 of the enemy in front of him. And when they got to him, he had 1 round of ammunition left.
Oh my gosh!
Had a fellow named Wilson Watson.
Wilson Watson.
Yeah.
He had taken out 60 Japanese.
That's what they counted in front of him.
With one round left.
Yeah,
Wow.
had one round left. Of course, that's what I say. Marines. Well, like during the Battle of Belleau Wood, now you've heard of that. That
Yeah.
was a World War I battle.
In France. I think.
Fought by Marines.
Yes.
And but it was, what I've read, it was very disorganized. They weren't very well organized. But those Marines were such good marksmen. They were picking off the Germans at 400 yards,
Oh.
while all the Germans there, they were accurate for about 200 yards.
So they
won the Battle of Belleau Wood just by.
Did you, as a boy growing up, firearms and rifles?
Oh yes. I mean, I've thought about it since. I mean, they thought nothing about it. I'd go at the age of 12 with a shotgun, and nobody thought anything about it.
Hunting for deer,
Hunting for
rabbits and
Yeah, wouldn't hit many of them. But
well, I would imagine a lot of our finest Marines, and especially since they're so skilled with riflery.
Well, that's done at these rifle ranges. They put people out there who, in the first place, you will work for about a week, not firing any round, but you're practicing, you know, what, just dry firing. And they'll have some first-rate marksmen there teaching you. And if you don't get in the right position, they'll put you in the right position, and you'll know you've been put there, you know. I know when I went through the rifle range at Paris Island, they had a fellow there in charge of the rifle range. His name was Don Truesdale. One-armed Marine.
One arm?
One arm.
Oh my God.
But he had a Medal of Honor during the Nicaraguan War. Somebody had thrown a hand grenade, and he picked the thing up to throw it back, and it went off in his arm.
Oh, God.
So.
But he became a training officer at Paris Island.
He was. Don Truesdale was. He was in charge of the rifle range, pretty much. And that business, I'll tell you one war story talking about Don throwing that grenade, trying to throw it back. I threw one at a fellow once who threw it back at me. He threw it in my direction. He didn't get close to me.
He threw one at you and missed, and
well, I saw him go into a trench, and I lobbed it right in where I'd seen him go, and that thing just came bouncing back.
I bet he did. Where was that?
That was the Iwo Jima.
Well, Dale, this has been terrific. Let me just ask you, what would you say, as an attorney, you're most proud of? You're still practicing law, which is something that you should be very proud of.
I'm proud of the fact that people will still hire me to to go to work. And
well, you're a
well, for instance, I'm still proud of these people that I helped in the early days by finding employment for them.
Who had families and
getting them steered into. You're always trying to get people to obey the law. Of course, you know a lot of them are going to violate it just as soon as they get back home or before they get home. For instance, I knew a fellow from Cosby, Tennessee one time. He went to prison, served several months for making whiskey, and on his way home, he stopped and bought the makings of another still.
on his way home from
on his way home from prison.
Oh gosh!
He bought the equipment to make another still. They told that story got out on.
He just knew no other life.
He was from a family that was the way he was. He had the nickname Sharky. In fact, Sharky, I knew him quite well. He was running from a revenuer once, and the revenuer had a sheriff with him. sheriff of Sevier County shot at him and hit him in the arm.
Oh my God.
That was something that wasn't done. I mean, federal agents didn't shoot at anybody. They weren't going to. I mean, you could raid moonshine stills without bothering to carry a weapon.
Yeah.
And sometimes wouldn't, because their weapons weight you down.
Yeah. You needed to have as much speed at your
Yeah.
disposal as you could.
You know you're not going to kill one of
Yeah.
them, and they're not going to kill you. Why carry it?
Yeah. So you would say that you take a lot of pride in having helped out a lot of people who were, maybe not all of them, but a good many of them turned to
a good many of them,
solid, decent
yes.
life.
I mean, became very, very useful citizens. I mean, some of them have type personalities. They'll become influential politically. In fact, I represented a fellow just recently. Believe it or not, they had him accused in Hickman County of voting illegally. And the reason he was voting illegally is that he had in fact been convicted of whiskey in 1981. Now wait a minute. He was convicted in '82, and but he had been he was convicted in '82, but the whiskey that he had made was in '81. And it was about that time that they passed a law prohibiting any felon from voting. Before that time, it was only certain specified felons that couldn't vote. Well, he'd been voting all along, just kept voting. The people, everybody knew him, knew that he'd been convicted of whiskey, but nobody ever challenged him. And he has long been a member of the county commission in the county where he lives. But last year they indicted him for illegally voting. But that statute says that he must knowingly do it. Well, he didn't know it. The jury acquitted him.
Just recently.
Yeah.
Well,
it's been 4 months ago.
You're quite a tribute to the profession and your ability to continue practicing law in good shape for 7 years.
But that particular individual had, he'd been you might say a leading citizen, you know, if you're a member of the county commission, but he's not just a member of the commission. I was told that he and one other fellow were the two strongest voices on the commission.
Is that right?
Yeah. So
he must have created an enemy somewhere in there.
Well, yeah, he told me who had fired this thing up, somebody that was a political adversary.
Well, it's sometimes a shame how criminal prosecutions are guided by political animosities.
Well, that's true.
As a prosecutor myself, I try to avoid that.
Well, I don't see it here in Nashville.
Yeah,
I don't. But you will see it other places. I don't. Heck, I can't think of anything in recent times. But I mean, you've had DAs in this county who wouldn't tolerate it, like Tom Shriver wouldn't have, and you haven't had anybody but him and Torrey, have you?
Torrey Johnson has been the district attorney for longer than any other district attorney in Davidson County history. He's been it for 25 plus years. And Tom Shriver before him was DA for about 20 or 20
Tom was elected in 1966. And I remember there was one assistant DA part-time who was working both sides.
Which was, I mean, it was part-time DAs could earn a living
yeah.
independently.
Well, this fellow was part-time, and he was prone to, well, actually there was one lawyer who would associate him from time to time in civil cases, let him make a good fee. Well, if that particular lawyer had a criminal case, he might wind up with a sweetheart deal. But anyway, Tom and Gail Robinson were running against one another. I was friendly with both of them. Actually, I voted for Shriver, in part because I'd gone to school to his daddy.
Oh, yeah.
And
Judge Shriver.
Judge Shriver,
Judge,
yeah, he was a chancellor, and then went to the Court of Appeal. But anyway, and I knew Shriver had no problem with Gail. But anyway, this DA was working both of them, so I just politely went to both of them and told them what he was doing. Well, after Shriver got elected, he went to Shriver and said, "Now, I tried to help you." Yeah, Shriver said, "I know." Said, "One of my best friends, you solicited money for my adversary." That was the end of that fellow.
I bet. Oh,
Yeah.
gosh,
Yeah, I'll tell you who that was sometime when we're not on the tube.
Well, Dale, thank you so much.
Well, you're kind to even think of having me here, Paul.
We will bring an end to the interview, and thank you so much for providing the time and the camera.